A warm welcome back to all the honorable members of the Civil Gang. Tonight we continue the Civilands series with Chapter 3, The Enemy of My Enemy. As always, I'm Nicholas Austin, and this is Tuesday Night Fiction.
This sound will call with spirit true. I swear I'll hear that sound in you.
They ran and ran, back through the woods and onward toward Dominic's campsite. They ran to escape the Vahani that they had just made to look like fools. For the first time since the attack on her family's home, Jeannie Morell felt hope. She recognized the man ahead of her as soon as she saw him, and though she never got to hear the story Harrison was going to tell her of Dominic Turner, she felt safe following him nonetheless. Hansa was also someone with whom she was familiar through their father's close relationship. When the trio finally reached the clearing by the River White, Jeannie took in the makeshift campsite that was already set up and took a moment to catch her breath. Dominic introduced his horse Nala to Jeannie and passed around rations of what food and water he had. "I'm sorry to end our brief rest so quickly, my friends, but they'll be leaving their camp and heading south sooner now rather than later," he said. "We have to move at least a few clicks up the river to avoid crossing their path." Jeannie nodded reluctantly. Then Dominic grabbed Nala and his supplies and they began trekking north along the river. They walked in silence for a while, still absorbing the events that had taken place. But her curiosity was bursting, and Jeannie could only force herself to hold the silence for so long. "You're Dominic Turner," she said to the man who brightened at her recognition. "I remember you from Haran. I don't remember hearing much about who exactly you are. So, who are you, sir? If you don't mind me asking," she politely quipped. "I am interested in hearing more as well," Hansa added. "I thought my people were the only ones who were special in the Murrieta. But last night I saw you manipulate fire in the sky. How did you acquire this power? And why have you brought such horrors to the Riverlands?" "Power," Dominic laughed. "How flattering. No, I'm what's known as an illusionist. My craft is welcome in the Murrieta by those who wish to be entertained, which is the thing that brought me here. Unfortunately, as an illusionist, I can't tell you how I do what I do, or it would no longer be special. And then no one would pay me," he said with a wink. "For now, just know that I am a great fan of your father, Jeannie Morell. He saved my life in more ways than one, so I consider it my duty to help protect yours in these difficult times. Actually, I admired both your fathers, as I told Hansa earlier." "If only I knew of a place you could guide me to," Jeannie said with a frown. "The only place I want to go now is back there, to find my sister," Hansa also muttered. "She needs to know that I am all right. She needs to know the truth about what happened," Dominic responded. "I'm sorry, Hansa. I wish we could have had the opportunity to free her, but there were simply too many men at your home. And that is not your fault. I should have prepared for such a possibility. Perhaps we could try to intercept her on their way, but that might be too difficult." Hansa shook his head. "No, that would be foolish," he said. "I just pray she remains unharmed." Jeannie felt her heart tug for Hansa's sister, but she suppressed it, as it only made her think of her own siblings, who she didn't have the opportunity to save at all. "I'm sure she will," Dominic said. "We will find a way to warn her somehow. Until then, and until we all find somewhere safe, I'll be your guide. And consider it no trouble. You both convinced me that there still might be hope for me and this place, and I owe you a debt for that alone." Dominic paused a moment before chiming. "I have an idea. How about I show you a trick, my young friends? Sometimes a sense of wonder can help us escape from hard times, even if only for a moment." Jeannie felt her mood lighten just a little. Maybe Dominic would make another quarter disappear. "There is no escaping the loss we have had to endure," Hansa moaned. "You cannot know the pain if you think it will just go away. I know I could never understand what each of you must be going through. But please, trust me for just one more moment if you would," Dominic replied. Hansa nodded, and Dominic sat them down in front of him and set up a small platform. On the platform, he placed 2 matches horizontally from one another. "2 simple matches," he said, as he displayed them with his hands. Dominic then placed his right hand over the right match and his left over the left. He lifted his hands to reveal both matches in the same place. Then he flipped his hands so that his palms faced up, and he once again covered both matches. Genie grew confused in anticipation as he again lifted to show the matches in the same place. The illusionist appeared amused by the children's reactions and lifted the right match with his right hand. After he revealed it to them, he placed it into his left hand, closing that hand as he did so. Finally, he lifted the left match with his right hand, first revealing it to them and then closing that hand around it. With both hands closed, he asked, "Now, Hansa, I'd like you to pick a hand, and I'll give you what's inside. Genie will get what's in the other. Be sure to choose very carefully." "But what is the difference between the matches in each hand?" Hansa asked as he reached out to select the left hand. "There is no difference between them at all," Dominic said with a playful grin. He opened his left hand to reveal that it was empty, and handed both matches to Genie. "But Genie will be able to tell you this for herself because she will have them both." Genie sat and stared at his hands. "How did you do that? How did you get the first match from your left hand to your right?" She looked up to see that Hansa appeared to be just as much in awe of the man as she was. "I understand your need to question, but as I said, a magician can never tell," he offered politely. "To remain on a good note, though, I believe we are far enough up the river to be out of harm's way now, children. Let us rest and make camp." Genie was exhausted, so this was welcome news. Once everything was set up, she was quick to plop down comfortably. To pass time, Dominic told stories about his more exciting journeys through the Murrieta and moments from the shows he had done. Hansa added tales of his people and their history, and particularly of the Grizzlies. It was a great relief for Genie to learn more about each of her new comrades, and she was glad to see Hansa begin to relax a little bit. She happily listened along and occasionally recounted memories from her childhood as well. After a good while of talking and resting, a faint rumbling of voices could be heard coming from a distance up the river. Genie was the first to jump at the sound, though she waited until Dominic signaled for them to quietly march ahead to investigate. As they got closer, Hansa made a movement, indicating that he recognized their location. They were approaching the banks where the bloodbath from earlier had occurred. From their safely distanced vantage point, Genie noted what must have been close to 100 men on the grounds of the scene. Several appeared to be searching for clues of what transpired.
"How the fuck did this happen?"
the leader yelled out. Genie recognized the shrill, icy voice as soon as she heard it. It was the same as the one that led the Keegan troop on her home. Her heart sank. Now the evil that was Clovis Keegan had a face, and oh, what a face it was. Though Clovis was similarly built and dressed as she remembered Walter and Daniel had been, he made no attempt to look as proper as they did. In fact, Clovis's beard and haircut were trimmed so poorly that it almost seemed like it had been done by design, so that regardless of his long, lean frame, he did not look elegant in the least. In a way, despite his distaste with everything around him, there was an atmosphere about him that suggested he knew, and was comfortable with, the kind of man he was. "These are Keegan men," Genie leaned over and whispered to Hansa and Dominic. "That one, with the fancy clothes, is Clovis Keegan."
"Devin!"
Clovis shouted. "What of Walter and the girl? I swear I'll melt the goddamn skin off whoever's responsible for this." A figure which Genie guessed was Devin stepped forward, a swagger in his step. He was not nearly as lavishly decorated as the leader, but was more so than the others and had large, puffy hair that to Genie made his head look kind of like a mushroom. Neither Walter or Genie Morell are anywhere to be found, and both seem to have made it away from here, he pleasantly reported, despite Clovis's demonic tone. "Based on the fact that one of our men had his head eaten to a pulp, and the hounds by the tree line are equally tattered, I'd say this was likely the indigenous people of the north. That, or I suppose it is also possible that smaller gang got hungry and ate most of this unfortunate soul's skull, as well as snacking on the dogs." Genie furrowed her brow at the oddity of this fellow. Although what he said was utterly ridiculous, she found it strange that he didn't seem to utter it with the least bit of sarcasm. "We found Walter's pin!" another man suddenly cheered. "See, Clovis, my friend," Devin chirped. "Nothing to worry about. Our comrade will be found, and there's a possibility we'll be able to melt the skin off monstrous cannibals." Dominic sighed suddenly and whispered, "Children, I've seen enough. They'll be on the trail of Hansa's people. We must stay out of sight and cross the river at our camp. We can head back toward Haran and plan our next move from there. I'd very much like to avoid these men. They are fiends like the rest, I am sure. And they're still after you, Jeannie." Jeannie sucked in a breath at the reminder but pulled her shoulders back to hide her fear. She nodded at Dominic, and the comrades crept away from their hiding place and back downstream toward their camp. Once they were out of earshot from the Keegans, Jeannie gently sang a hymn her mother, Gwendolyn, once sang her, called "When the Shadows Run." As they quickly packed up their camp, Hansa and Dominic turned to her in surprise when she began, but neither said anything to stop her as she sang.
You sound will come with spirit true. I swear I'll hear that sound in you. And when you run with a head and a start from shadows that will break your heart, my love, you'll see my light shine through those shadows chasing after you. So even when black night hung, still don't look back, the sun will come. Look back, the sun will come.
So following her escape from the Keegan gang, Dominic and Hansa have now also rescued Jeannie from the Vahani. That's part 1 of 3 tonight. Let's get started with part 2. Though Hansa struggled to maintain any degree of positivity, he was beginning to appreciate Dominic's lightheartedness. After having crossed the river, he, Jeannie, and Dominic pressed through the forest back toward Haran. They moved quietly, as they figured there could be stragglers from the Keegan group. Yet, when the tension was at its highest, Dominic interrupted the silence and asked, "Would you both like to hear a joke?" "Please," Hansa answered, with a smile, relieved to ease even a bit of tension. "Well, have you both seen how geese fly in a V formation?" he asked. Hansa nodded, and out of the corner of his eye he saw that Jeannie did as well. "Okay, so why do you think it is that one leg of the V is always longer than the other?" Dominic continued. "My people are connected to them, and I still do not know," Hansa joked. They were now within feet of the end of the forest. "It's longer because that leg has more birds in it," Dominic answered, his voice becoming distracted and trailing off the moment they emerged from the trees. Before them the remains of the Morel home stood, burned to the ground. Hansa knew he wasn't imagining the sight when Jeannie suddenly reacted, simply crumbling to the ground. Hansa rushed over and wrapped his arms around her, looking out at the rubble while she wailed, with a sorrow he could feel mirrored inside him. He could not believe his eyes. Of all the disorder that the men of the East brought to the territory, his father always told him that the Morels would stand tall. Arcuda understood the value that Adonis and his family brought to the Riverlands, as well as the entirety of the North, and Hansa feared for the fate of his home without these two great men. The thought also brought with it an epiphany. He was aware that the Keegans would certainly now be hunting his people, yet he struggled with the thought of helping the men who killed his father. The dangerous journey he would now have to make north into the mountain lands was thanks to them. Sending words that he was alive through the birds would not be enough when the councilmen had surely sent contradictory messages. He knew he could never forgive them for what they did. But with his sister back at the camp, could he allow the Keegans to trail them without sending any warning? If his people were found, the retaliation would certainly be relentless. They had killed Keegan men and taken Walter Keegan himself. So Hansa knew he had a decision to make. Jeannie was now starting to calm, so the trio walked closer to what remained of her home. They found a place to sit among the rubble and take a moment of respect, a moment to recognize the sorrow and let it pass. After a few minutes, Dominic asked, "My poor girl, if it's too much to ask, then please, don't trouble yourself. But could you tell us what took place here? How did this happen?" Hansa watched Jeannie intently, wondering if she'd be able to tell the tale. He'd struggled to tell that of his father. Jeannie wiped her eyes dry and began. "A few weeks ago, a well-dressed man came into town saying he wanted to do business with our father. At the time, I didn't know by his clothing or his pin that he was a Keegan. All I really noticed was his fancy dress and the speed of his horse." She cringed as she spoke of him. "He later came back, only this time he came to our home. He told us then that his name was Daniel Keegan. He discussed business with our father and told him that he ran a similar operation in the South with his brother William and was interested in a partnership of some kind. As much as I now hate this man, he was likable, and my father was kind, so he spoke of our operations here and their scale. I didn't see it then," she said in despair. "But now when I look back on it, I can remember the greed in his eyes. I remember how bright they became when he heard of my father's success. He was just too polite for me to recognize it at the time." Hansa knew firsthand it could be difficult to recognize the greed in any man's eyes. He hadn't seen it in Lennox's, confusing it for frustration or passion. "Was this Daniel fellow the man who attacked your home?" Dominic asked. "No," Jeannie said as she looked up at Dominic. "He left that night and never came back. The man who did come back was with those we saw at the river, and he was far worse. Though I didn't see his face at the time, he loudly introduced himself as Daniel's brother, Clovis Keegan. I only heard his voice as I was in the back of the house then, but in every word I could hear a cold evil. My father spoke to him and tried to tell him that an agreement could be made, but he demanded that my family leave town and give all we had to them, everything my dad had ever worked for." She stopped for a moment and Dominic placed his hand on her shoulder. "You can stop if you need to, my dear," he assured her. Jeannie shook her head. "No, it's all right. My father told them that he'd surrender once he gathered my family. When he came back inside, he wore a look of despair I'd never seen before. It broke my heart, and for that alone I want nothing more than to make them pay. That's when we all began to smell the smoke, but by then it was too late. My mother had me escape out the back and run off into the woods. She told me my brothers were upstairs, so she and my father needed to try and save them. I suppose she just didn't want them to die alone. She told me how much she loved me, and off I went." Jeannie was once again in tears. Hansa approached her and wrapped an arm around her shoulder. They were bonded by their losses, and because of that, he would hold it there for her as long as she needed. Sometime after, Dominic gently said, "We can make camp here for a while. I don't expect them to return to this place. After we get some rest, we'll head to town to stop at my home. I have some last things to tend to and some supplies to retrieve. Things we'll need. We'll discuss our next step then." Hansa nodded, and with a final squeeze of Jeannie's shoulder, he moved to begin setting up camp with Dominic. Once finished, Jeannie and Dominic soon fell asleep, but Hansa lay in his spot wide awake. After contemplating his decision for a few minutes, he got up, walked toward the tree line, and took a knee. Hearing of the terror that occurred here had brought him to his decision. He could not knowingly let these treacherous Keegans reach his sister or his people, and was determined to prevent it no matter who received his message. He hesitated again for only an instant, but reassured himself and called up to the wind. An eagle replied. So now we've seen the ashes of the Morel home. Perhaps something larger will be built in its wake. Or perhaps not. Let's carry on and find out. When the wedding day came, William was stressed. He had so many thoughts racing through his mind. although his most prevalent feeling was still one of happiness. When it was arranged for the Abigails to come to the territory, he did not anticipate actually falling for Judith whatsoever. From what he had heard, she was a simple, proper lady, and though he placed great emphasis on being outwardly proper, it wasn't true to who he was on the inside. Now that the wedding day was here, and he knew the real Judith, he was so elated that he truly felt love for his bride. While preparing for the ceremony, he was joined by Henry Abigail, Daniel, and the chauffeur, Cassius. "You remind me very much of your father as a young man, William," Mr. Abigail said in admiration. William turned his head slowly toward Mr. Abigail, his movement like that of an owl. "If I turn out to be anything like my father as an older man, then I'll remember that as an insult," William icily replied. "Oh, I didn't mean anything negative by it, Mr. Abigail started. "Henry, please," William chuckled as a grin snapped across his face, and he loosened back up. "I was joking." "Oh, well, of course," Mr. Abigail lightly replied. "He just had the same look of ambition that I see in you every day. That was all I meant anyway. Please excuse me now, though. I have to prepare to walk your bride down the aisle and to appease Miss Abigail's every whim to ensure this affair meets her impossible standards," he praised with a wink. "I'll see you all out there." Once Henry left, Daniel walked up to his brother and dusted off his suit. "You ready, Billy?" he asked. At times it was hard for even William to believe that Daniel was not the eldest of the Keegan brothers. Despite the fact that William was the leader here in the Murrieta, Daniel had always been the one who looked out for the other two. He was certainly the kindest and most well-liked in any case. "I'm about as ready as I ever could be," William replied, feeling somewhat awkward and nervous. He was as well groomed as he'd been in his entire life, and though he appreciated appearance, he couldn't deny feeling somewhat uncomfortable with it. "This woman will be my queen with the help of her father." "That she will. And you'll be king," Daniel encouraged him. Suddenly a knock came to the door and Gregory entered the room. William thought that the giant man had always looked odd in formal clothes. It was as if none could ever be made to fit him properly. "Gregory, what can I do for you, my friend?" William asked. "Sir, we've received news from Clovis of our exploits in the north," he replied. Daniel turned to Cassius. "Thank you for your assistance, sir. You've been a tremendous help to our family, as well as the Abigails. If you could please go outside now and prepare for the ceremony while we discuss business, that'd be greatly appreciated." Cassius acknowledged Daniel with a shake of his hand. Matching Daniel's level of politeness, he chirped, "Of course. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to come find me. I'd be glad to accommodate any request that you may have. I'm here to serve the Abigails, and now that will include serving you as well." William was beginning to warm up to this mysterious man and believed his skills could be utilized in some way if or when the time came. He intended to test his loyalty at a later time, however, and today was not that day. He then looked down and noticed that Cassius was still gripping Daniel's hand. Odd, that. "Thanks again, Cassius. See you outside," Daniel replied smoothly as Cassius nodded and finally relinquished his grip. Once Cassius left the room, the Keegan's attention fixed onto Gregory. "Clovis sent one of our men back from Haran. He says the town is under our control. But there was an issue with the Morel family," Gregory said. This news brought a sour taste to William's mouth. The Morels were the key to controlling the north. "What kind of issue?" William asked slowly with a calm anger. Gregory hesitated. "Billy," he started. "I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but Clovis's man said they weren't intimidated none. He said shots were fired from the home, so Clovis had no choice but to defend the men. In the end, they burned the house to the ground with the Morels inside it." William looked at Gregory and then at Daniel in shock. "Why would those motherfuckers shoot at a group of 100 men?" William blurted. "I suppose it could have been out of pride or stupidity or both," Daniel replied with a contemplative look on his face. "Maybe it was an accident," he added. Daniel. I expect better from you. You know accidents like that simply do not happen. William joked. Whatever it was, though, now we'll have to start from goddamn square one up there. Our hostile takeover plan was certainly an easier, more ideal one. So I suppose it was a nice try there, brother. He commended Daniel, who beamed at him. Perhaps we won't have to change our strategy at all, though, Billy, Gregory added. I didn't get to finish the rest of the details of the incident. The man also said that one of the members of the family survived. It was the daughter, Jeannie Morel. Unfortunately, she escaped, but she's believed to be alive. William looked up, excitement filling him, but Daniel responded first. That is great news. We must find her. She'll still have the trust of the people in the north, and with some convincing, can allow us to fill the void. Yes, though unfortunately it won't be easy, Gregory said. Clovis sent Walter and a group of men into the woods after her, and they were met by the Vahani clan. All the bodies were located except Walter's and Jeannie's. The last the messenger heard was that Clovis believes Walter is being held captive, and that the girl is likely with them as well. Good Lord, Gregory. You're just lifting me up and throwing me back to the cold ground right now, aren't you? So what now? William asked. What do you mean, Billy? Gregory followed. Did he not say what those tribal fucks intend to do next? William asked again with great anticipation. Oh, yes. Clovis believes they're now headed south. He said that he'll stalk them and get back Walter and the girl. Gregory finished. Daniel looked at William and reported. Overall, this is great news. Not exactly according to plan, but nothing ever is. Very true, William agreed, feeling himself calm. I must ask you to travel to Haran now, Daniel. After the wedding, of course. I'll send you with a contingent of men who will assist you in holding the town. I need you to begin establishing our trade relationships in the Riverlands. Once the girl's located, I want there to be a seamless transition, so that we have a hand in all dealings from that point through the south. When that's complete, it'll just be a matter of taking the diamond-rich mountain lands and their fortress. I'll gladly go and work my magic, Billy, Daniel exclaimed. Now let's get out there and get you married. As they filed out of the room, they noticed Cassius walking away. William thought it odd again, but he was looking forward to the wedding too much to dwell on it. That winter day couldn't have been more beautiful, nor the decoration more elegant outside of the Keegan mansion. William marveled that people from all over Fayette were in attendance, all clamoring to witness what would be a marriage of the most powerful people in the Murrieta. Almost all of the men and women originated in the east, so they all would know the influence of both the Keegan and Abigail families. Both families sat in the front. Blanton and Donna sat next to Francis, Florence, and Henrietta. By now it seemed Francis's experience with the Keegan twins had taught him not to question them. In fact, the children were all beginning to become somewhat friendly. Florence and Henrietta even played with Donna on occasion, though Blanton still always needed to be present, much to his dismay. Clovis and Walter were in their predicament and therefore absent, but otherwise all was going well. William could not wait to see his bride. He was so excited to have an equally ambitious companion with whom he could share his dreams and power. It certainly didn't hurt either that she was an incredibly beautiful young woman, or that she brought with her even greater opportunity than he was already seizing here in the Murrieta. Unable to wait, he came to the kitchen where she was making last-minute preparations with her mother and father. William could tell Judith was rather stressed, so he remained quiet after greeting Henry. Maria offered Judith a glass of wine. Here, honey, take a sip of this, she said. It's imported and it's delicious. It'll calm your nerves. While looking out at the altar, Judith hurriedly reached for the glass. Still staring at the scene outside, she moved the glass quickly and clumsily toward her mouth. Her carelessness caused her to spill some of the drink down the side of her face and onto her neck. Oh shit! Get me a fucking washcloth, please! She blurted, wiping her face with one hand and preventing the wine from reaching her dress with the other. She was successful in this maneuver, but the stream of red wine now stained her neck. William suppressed a chuckle. It oddly pleased him to see her as nervous as he felt. Maria hurried over to Judith with a cloth. "Please don't use that language in front of your parents," she pleaded. "Don't lose your head. Everything's going to be okay, my love," she added as she wiped Judith's neck clean. "When your father and I got married, I didn't have my mother to reassure me. Not because she wasn't alive at the time, but because she had drank completely too much wine and was out of her mind drunk. She even had to be escorted back to her room by my father, who she blamed for the whole thing, and missed the whole ceremony." They laughed together at this. "I was extremely embarrassed at the time. But the night belonged to your father and I, and nothing could take that away from us. You'll find the same is the case for you no matter what happens, I promise." William was glad this reassurance seemed to calm his bride, for with a deep breath, she told her mother she was ready. William quietly exited and went to take his place by the altar. The ceremony went without a hitch. It was exactly as William had hoped, and how he promised Judith it would go. Once it was over, those in attendance gathered in the reception area. The food and wine were delicious as advertised, and everyone was having a great time. William was certainly one of the happiest men in the Murrieta, and was very much enjoying the wine himself. The more he drank, the more talkative he became, and after a few hours, he had spoken to nearly everyone in attendance. He later found his way over to Daniel. "This is really happening, my brother," he said in a somewhat slurred voice. "Yes, this is all real," Daniel said as he put an arm around William's shoulder with a laugh. William steadied himself and clarified. No, I mean our success here. It's really happening." "Yes, that is real too. It is extremely impressive what you've been able to accomplish, Billy," he lauded. William looked at his brother with bloodshot eyes and a face lit up by the praise. "Do you think Father will approve of us now? Do you think he'll respect us as equals again?" he asked hopefully. "I wish I could say with certainty, but there is no telling with him," Daniel replied with a sigh as he looked out to the open field of the mansion yard. "But you shouldn't worry yourself if he doesn't, Billy. You've achieved so much. His approval's too unreliable a thing for earning it to be your goal." This troubled William, though it was not the first time Daniel tried to tell him this. He looked down at the ground with despair. No matter what Daniel said, his desire to gain his father's approval was unflappable. It drove him like nothing else. He began thinking of the possibility of never getting to that point, and it started to cause a sharp pain behind his eyes. "I don't feel well," William told his brother as he began to clench his head. Daniel held him up slightly as he began to sway. "Let's get you inside to relax for a little while," he said. In that moment, though, William's pain intensified, and he started to groan under his breath. Daniel became more insistent on getting him inside before anyone noticed. William then looked out onto the field. On the horizon in the far distance, he saw a blurry figure in white standing completely still. To him, it looked to be about the height of a child. What is that?" he asked, pointing in that direction, sweat now profusely dripping from his face. Daniel looked puzzled. "There's nothing there, Billy. Come on, let's go." Suddenly, the sky started to darken, and worried voices filled the reception room. William looked up to see the largest mass of crows he had ever seen. "The fuck?" Daniel said quietly, assuring William that this time he wasn't the only one seeing the phenomenon. Then the sound hit them. The noise the crows emitted as they flew above them was as massive as the flock itself, which completely filled the sky. Guests began to panic as the crows blocked out the sun, leaving the entire setting in darkness. Food and drinks were knocked to the floor, and glassware was shattered. All in attendance stared up in disbelief. But William didn't feel shock so much as foreboding. "They flew in from the north!" William had to yell, leaning towards Daniel. "What does it mean?" he shouted again. Of course, no answer came. A few minutes later, the last of the crows passed, and the flyover ended. Daniel turned to William and shakily said, "Find your wife and get inside. I'll calm the guests and see them out." We'll figure this out once we've ensured this wedding has ended on a positive note." William nodded, and then found and held his wife, leading her inside. He left Daniel to the work of charming each and every guest, as he'd promised. So that'll do it for Chapter 3. We had a shorter one this week, but I'd like to thank every member of the Civil Gang once again for listening in. And to any new civilians out there, welcome aboard. We're always accepting new members, and we've got plenty of journey left ahead of us. So saddle up and know that your brothers and sisters are right behind you. As I mentioned, this whole podcasting thing is a little bit new for me, so if you have any feedback or thoughts on the chapters, maybe one of the discussion episodes touched you in a particular way, wink, 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 feel free to reach out on my contact form, on my website, nbaustinbooks.com, or on social media. I'd love to hear from you. And who knows, I might even respond on the next discussion episode if you do, so go ahead and tell me what's on your mind. As always, if you're enjoying the podcast, like, share, and subscribe. As mentioned in previous episodes, we have a giveaway right now for those who do share, in particular. If you do share this podcast on social media and you either tag me or you could even just send me a screenshot to my contact form, you'll immediately become eligible for the first 3 books of the Civilands series signed by me, all paperback copies, as well as a paperback copy of Ready Player One. We've already had a couple entries, and this giveaway will go until the 6th episode, which is next week's discussion episode. So hurry up and share if you're interested in winning 4 free books. For anyone who's already read any of the Civilands series books and enjoyed them, if you could go on Amazon and leave a review, I would greatly appreciate it. Also, if you listen to this podcast on a podcatcher that has a review system, that would be great as well. And if you are enjoying the podcast so much that you're not willing to wait till the following week for the next chapter to be released, my books are all available on Amazon in ebook and paperback. They're also available in some other online stores in ebook if you prefer. Since this show is completely free, the best way to show your support for now is to buy those books. So if you're super excited about what you're hearing in this community that we're starting, just know that your support helps grow our gang. One last time, I'd just like to say thanks again for listening in. This has been Nicholas Austin with Tuesday Night Fiction. I'll talk to you next Tuesday.
You sound will call with spirit true. I swear I'll hear that sound in you.
The Tuesday Night Fiction podcast, the Civilands series, and the musical score for the podcast are all produced